on. A lot of you have been in all day in a lot of sessions, so it's been a long day, start at 8 a.m. But we have David Greenberg joining us, who works for NACSA, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, and used to work at Osprey Wilds. You've probably seen him at a session before if you've done any of our trainings. Actually used to, he was Aaron's predecessor. So he's agreed to join us and talk to us about public school funding and financial management. So welcome, David.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. It's good to know that I got the last session of the day. Yeah, you guys, tell me a little bit, Pat, what's been going on all day?
Well, we had just kind of the intro of like the purpose of charter schools. Oh, geez, we had the last one was a data practices, which is a new requirement from the state. We had open meeting law. We had someone in the chat or unmute yourself. Help me out. I can't remember the word.
Yeah, I get the idea. All
Yeah.
the good fun stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Abby, for putting your name in the chat and your school and your role. I asked that everyone, if you could throw your name, your school, and your role, as Abby has very effectively modeled for us, that would be great. I'd love to have a sense of who's in the room as we get started. As Pat alluded to, I used to sit in Aaron's seat and worked at Osprey Wilds for about 7 years. I've been gone from there for about 5 years, but have visited, and I know many of your schools quite well, although it's probably been a few years since I've been to your schools, been to North Lakes, read the new Montessori many years ago. Visited Swan River Montessori many times, Cross Lake. So I know your schools, and I'm really pleased to be here with you today. Let's fly through. Start. Pat's going to share slides and move through that. Let's go to the next slide and talk about our objectives today. So yeah, our objective is to really deepen your understanding of your role as a board member in financial oversight, budgeting, and evaluation of the school's financial performance. This is a beginning, not an end. And so hopefully by the end of this session, you will be better prepared to really talk about your school's finances and financial health. When you're sitting in a board meeting, you'll have a little more understanding of what's going on. As board members, you are responsible for financial oversight of a public institution, and so that you'll be better prepared to do that. Part of that is asking good questions, and certainly understanding how to monitor your school's budget consistent with your school's mission, values, and student outcomes. I'm going to start out with a quick poll here. I can launch that, Pat, or you want to launch that? Oh, I guess I already launched it. There it is. Or you did. Want to get a sense, what do you know about charter school finance or public school finance? Please take a second and answer this. Do you know that the school gets money and spends it and not much more than that? Do you understand a little bit about the finance stuff at your board meeting? You're pretty knowledgeable, or do you think you're ready to start a charter school financial business? Second, 20 seconds here. Do you know about charter school finance? Got a couple more who should be answering. If you've just joined us, please throw your name in the chat, your school, and your role and you should see a poll up in front of you asking, how much do you know about charter school finance? Right. Take 5 more seconds, 1 or 2 more, squeeze in there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Got a good crew here. All right. It looks like we've got at least one newbie here and a big group here who's got some basic understanding, and a group who's got a little bit more understanding. So at the moment, doesn't look like we have any experts in the room. So that's helpful. Well, I want to try to, wherever you're at in this range, I want to try to meet you where you're at and take you a little bit further. So that's helpful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's proceed. Just some norms. This is probably similar to what you've seen in the other sessions. This is really about learning. We're here about students. That's why we're here, is because of students. So let's keep them at the center. Please ask questions, share your ideas, use the chat. Encourage you to come on camera if you're up for it. Feel free to come off mute and share ideas that you have. Use your hand raising tool or whatever. It's the end of the day. Some of you have probably been in 2 or 3 other trainings, so hopefully this will be a little bit of fun. So I don't know if you've done this before, but you are all currently off camera, so that's good. What I want you to do is go down into your video, down below where you see the video camera, click on the little arrow next to the video. And I want you to, actually, no, I'm sorry. Click on the 3 dots next to anyone. Could be Lou, Paula, Belinda. If you click on the 3 dots, you can see something that says hide non-video participants. If you click on that, you should only see Pat and me. And then I'm going to ask Pat to turn his video off, and I'm going to turn my video off. And Pat, you can actually stop sharing the screen for a minute. And you should see nothing. You should see your own name and nothing else. And so I'm going to ask a couple questions and ask you to turn on your video. So, for example, if you are a board member of a charter school, please turn on your camera. All right, we've got a good crew here. I'm going to ask just a couple of you to share. Sheila, would you share kind of where you're at and your role? And please share if you're a parent, teacher, or community member.
I'm at Cane River STEM School in southern Minnesota, about 40 minutes south of Lake Burnsville. I'm a 4-5 teacher, interventionist, and on the school board.
Awesome. Thank you. I love your school. Chai, would you share your role and where you're at?
I'm at Noble Academy. I'm on the school board, and I'm a teacher. I teach middle school Hmong culture and literacy.
Awesome. Thank you. I love your school too. Amy.
I'm at Swan River Montessori in Monticello, and I'm a children's house teacher, teach preschool and kindergarten.
Awesome. So a lot of teachers. Keep your camera on if you are a parent. And if you are not a parent, I mean, a parent board member. Many of you might be parents, but if you are a parent, board member of your school. Hi, Belinda. Tell us what where you're at.
Hi, I'm at Cross Lake, so Cross Lake Community School.
Nice. And how old's your child?
I've
What
got
grade is-
2. I've got
Two.
a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, 1st and 4th.
Cool. Thank you. And Abby, you're a board member as well? Oh, And what school are you at? Oh, I don't hear you. We're not hearing you. Your mic's not activated. Chat, please. All right, next question. So Abby, we're playing a little game. If you turn your camera off and you hide non-video participants, you should see no one. And then I'm going to ask people to turn their camera on if they fit a particular role. That makes sense? All right. So if you are new to your board within the last 12 months, I'm sorry, within the last 6 months, please turn on your camera. Hi, Jan. Tell us where you're at. And be sure to unmute.
Sorry, I'm at Three Rivers Montessori.
Wonderful. And you
this
just joined the board?
Correct.
Excellent. And are you a teacher, parent?
I'm a
member?
teacher.
Excellent.
And I teach kindergarten.
Excellent. Thank you. And is it Aide?
Yes, my name is Aide Mendoza,
And what school are you at?
Aurora Charter School.
And you're new on the board?
Yes. Been there 2 months.
And are you a parent or community member or?
I am a parent.
Wonderful.
Yeah, my oldest, the first one that went to Aurora, he's now 21, 22. And I still have one more that is in middle school.
Nice. I love Aurora. I live in the neighborhood over there.
Oh, okay.
All right, let's one more. If please turn off your cameras. Do you know how to turn off your camera? There we go. If you are a school director or school leader or have some administrative role at your school, please turn on your camera. Like a good school leader, she's out there, you know, roaming the halls, working all the time. Paula, tell us where you're at. Oh, you're on mute, if you can unmute.
Okay, there you go. I'm at Three Rivers Montessori School.
And you're pretty new there, yeah?
Yeah, yep, this is my first year here.
Wow, congratulations. So
Yeah,
one or 2 weeks in, I would imagine.
Well, actually, the summer, getting ready for the school year is
Well, for sure.
always good too. But yeah,
Excellent.
6 days with kids.
Wonderful, thanks. Well, welcome. Jenna, tell us where you're at.
Hi, and hi, Paula. Good to see
Hi.
you.
Yeah, you too. You too, Jenna.
Paula and I both come from the public school world, and I am brand new as the online director with Cross Lake Community School.
I just had lunch with your predecessor a couple of weeks ago. So
Did you?
I did.
Oh, I have big shoes to fill. Very big.
She's awesome. Well,
Yes,
she worked at Osprey Wilds back in the day for a minute.
I heard that. Well,
welcome.
thank you.
If I didn't call, turn off your camera, and if I didn't call you, if you didn't turn on your camera for some other reason, turn on your camera now. I guess that's you and me, Pat. All right. So last thing, turn on your camera if you think charter schools are great for kids in our communities. All right. I know we all got to turn it on for this. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for playing. Good to get to know many of you. I know we didn't hear from everyone, but hopefully we will during the course of this session. My name is David Greenberg. I invite you to stay on camera as long as you feel comfortable. My name is David Greenberg, and I, as Pat said, I work at the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, which is exactly what it says. I live in Minneapolis. I'm from the Twin Cities. Worked at the Audubon Center of the Northwoods, what what is now Osprey Wilds, for 7 years. And prior to that, I was a school leader at a school called El Colegio Charter School in South Minneapolis. I was one of the founders of that school. I was a teacher. And for a time at El Colegio, I did our school finances. And so I'm not an accountant. I don't have a formal background in accounting or finance or any of that kind of stuff. But I'm good at that kind of stuff, or I had a lot of help learning how to do that. And so I got a pretty deep understanding of charter school finance. And then during my time at Osprey Wilds, visiting your schools, looking at your financial statements, looking at your school's audits, going to board meetings, I learned a lot more about school finance. And in the last 5 years in my current job, I've been able to see what things look like nationally. So again, I'm not an accountant, but I understand school finance, and I'm hoping to be able to speak a language that's not accountants speak, but it's just normal people language about money and finances in schools and your responsibility as board members and school leaders. So let's keep it moving, Pat. All right. We're going to start with this question about why your board of directors exists and what's the purpose of your board of directors. And I'd love to have you throw in the chat. Think on this for a minute. In 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to write your answer in the chat. So go ahead and type it, but don't press enter until I say. Why does your board of directors exist of your charter school, and what's its purpose? Again, start typing in the chat, but don't press enter until I say so. Suggesting there's one right answer here. 10 more seconds. All right, go ahead and press enter. All right, we're getting some good answers. Ensure the policies are executed, ensure the rules, regulations, and policies are being followed. Oversee finance and operations. Make sure things are done correctly. Got a lot with policies. Ensure students learn and rules are followed. Oversight, governance, all great answers. Let's go forward one slide. I'm gonna share something that a guy named Brian Carpenter, I learned from a guy named Brian Carpenter. He's got a book called Charter School Board University. Some of your schools have this book on your shelf. And he says essentially what, who said it? Lou. What Lou said, that to ensure students are learning. That's why you're here. All of us are here to make sure kids are learning and kids are well, and to make sure that we're following the rules, right? Nothing bad is happening, nothing illegal, nothing unethical, nothing imprudent. This is about kids. It's not about money. It's not about policies, right? It's about kids. So just really want to drive that home. So what does that mean? Well, one of the things it means, as board members, serving on a public charter school board means that you hold essentially a public office, right? You were elected not by the public, but by a group, right? By the teachers and the parents at the school. But the charter school is a public entity. It's a public school, and serving on the board of that, you're more than a volunteer. You are indeed a volunteer. You don't get paid, but you are of sorts a public official. And so you've got a really, really critical role in helping ensure students learn. So let's go to the next. And so what that means, and we're here to talk about the financial stuff, But really, the financial oversight is focused on getting great outcomes for kids. It's not focused on putting money in the bank or anything like that. It's not a business like a restaurant that wants to serve people good food, of course, but the restaurants are generally in business to make money. Schools are in business to serve kids and families. So we need to get great outcomes for kids today. We need to get sustainable great outcomes for kids tomorrow and next year. And we need to meet our ethical, moral, and legal obligations. How does that sit with folks? Does that sound any different? Is that a different framing, or does that resonate? Sheila, that's like feels right? Great. Let's talk about what this all translates into. First of all, Minnesota charter schools exist in Minnesota because the state legislature created them 33 years ago. And I think, as Minnesota does with almost all its laws, the law was created for a purpose. And that purpose has evolved a little over the years. But the primary purpose of charter schools is to improve all pupil learning and all student achievement. That's why charter schools were created. So that's consistent with this idea that we're here to make sure kids are learning and kids are well. There's some additional purposes that are in the statute. This idea of increased learning opportunities for students, innovative teaching, innovative ways of measuring outcomes, new forms of accountability, and new professional opportunities for teachers. Every one of your schools has identified one of these additional purposes for why your school exists in your contract with your authorizer. And you should know what that is. Hey, if we said one of the things we're here to do is innovative teaching, you should be talking about that as a board. Another thing, getting great outcomes for your kids, for your students, and meeting ethical and moral obligations. Another way that comes to life is through your charter contract with your authorizer. In your contract with your authorizer, with Osprey Wilds, there are specific student performance goals, reading, math, science, environmental education. There's also financial health, organizational health, different things like that. Your charter contract really outlines the expectations of the performance. And then finally, and perhaps not most importantly, but very importantly for sure, is your school's mission. Each of your schools is very unique. And you're there for your school's mission. You're not there for the law. You're not there for the contract with the authorizer. You're there for the mission. But all these three things together really have an interplay of identifying what do we mean when we say great outcomes for kids and following the law and following the rules. So let's take a look. Let me know in the chat or come off mute. Do you see your mission up here? We got 4 schools out of 35, or out of maybe 19 in the room, or 18. Any of these missions yours at your school? Do you know? And I guess maybe even another question is, if it was up there, would you recognize it? I don't think people don't necessarily need to be able to recite the mission word for word, but you should have the spirit of the mission. Given everything that you all said, I don't think any of your missions are up here. None of you are there. But make sure you know what your mission is of your school, and you guys should talk about this as a board. What is our mission and what does it mean? So just to look at this first one, to provide a student-directed learning environment that is challenging, democratic, reflective, joyful, and hopeful. There's a lot of words in there that have a lot of meanings that Emily might interpret them differently from Jenna, from Pat, and from Aide. So let's talk about this. If this is the mission of our school, let's talk about what does this really mean to us? What does it mean to the teachers and the students, so that we know how to measure if we're actually achieving it? Because if we don't know what these words mean, how do we measure a joyful learning environment? It's absolutely measurable. We just have to be clear on what we mean. And it has to translate into a budget, which is more what we're here to talk about. So for example, if we look at the third one, to engage learners in an academically rigorous, student-centered, hands-on experiences, and leadership opportunities for the science, environmental, education, and agricultural context. What would you expect to see in a budget? Anyone share in the chat or come off mute. What's something you might expect to see in the budget of that third school? Field trips, yeah. We're getting out in the environment. And what else might you expect to see? Yeah, outdoor learning. Investment in science, like equipment, probably, right? Materials. Special education resources, for sure. Well, we'll see that in all the schools. So in your mission, I mean, we look at the second one, we would expect to see things in the budget that translate, that demonstrate we're investing in Ojibwe immersion. So we're investing in teachers who are bilingual, for example. In the fourth one, we're investing in experiential programs, in experiential types of things, service learning, for example. Your mission comes to life through your budget, in part. All right, let's move. We're gonna touch on these at the beginning and we're gonna touch on these at the end. And if there's one thing that I want you to walk away from today thinking about, it's this slide. Because as board members, sometimes you get a lot of information coming at you, and it's hard to know what matters. And from a financial lens, I think these are 5 things that really matter. The first one's not going to be a shock. What's our enrollment? How much did we budget for? What is our actual enrollment? And how much are we being paid by the Department of Education? Okay, we're going to talk more about these, but I want to plant the seed now and come back to it. Let's go to the next question. Are actual revenues and expenditures consistent with the budgeted amounts? We budgeted $5,000 for field trips. And it's March. How much have we spent on field trips? Fair question, right? Or we anticipate getting $100,000 in grants, and we've only gotten 20,000. What does that mean? Do we have enough cash to cover our expenses? Your school cannot exist without cash, right? Just like no business, no organization can live without cash. So you need to know, do we have enough cash? The most important question, are we achieving our desired student outcomes? That might not seem like a financial question, but it absolutely is, because money helps you get the outcomes you seek. It's not the only thing, but some programs might be effective, and so we should invest in those programs. Some programs might be ineffective, and maybe we shouldn't invest in those programs. And then finally, is the school spending funds appropriately and in compliance with law? All right, we're going to come back to these questions. All right, got some activity in the chat coming up. Let's go to the next slide. Think about, for a second, what buckets of money does a charter school get? Like, let's think about, where does the school get its money? And you can think kind of specifically and kind of generally. Just throw in the chat, where do you think charter schools get their money? Just brainstorm. Let's have a big brainstorm here. Throw any idea in the chat. All right. Grants. Certainly the Department of Education. They are the sugar daddy. They send us the checks. Where do they get their money? Yeah, the state money, right? The government, right? The taxpayers. The federal money, grants. ADM. What other kind of buckets of money do we get? Keep brainstorming. Everyone try to come up with one thing. Fundraisers. Back when I was a kid, some of you were probably about the same age, in the 70s and 80s, there used to be like a thing that said, you know, I don't know, there was a thing about schools are having fundraisers to pay for pencils while we're, our government is investing in other things. I don't want to get political. Lease aid, yeah, that's a very unique and special, important bucket of money that pays for our leases on our buildings. Special education money is a very important, unique bucket of money. All right, let's kind of go through, Pat, some of these different buckets. So one bucket is what we call state general aid. So it's money from the state. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's just your basic quote, basic formula. On top of that, you get some transportation money. We get some money that is specifically related to English learners. We get compensatory revenue. There's a lot of money in the general aid. The basic formula is when we hear about school funding, we typically hear about that, quote, basic formula. Then we get lease aid. Okay, this is money that's specifically designed to help charter schools pay for their leases, their facilities leases. And this is a pretty unique thing nationally. Minnesota's charter schools are pretty lucky. Then we get a lot of dollars for special education from the state. We get dollars, other state dollars, facilities maintenance, Indian Ed. There's these endowment funds and different little pockets of money. We get a lot of money from the federal government, right? Special education aid. We get title money, Title I, Title II, Title III, some cases Title VII. Some of your schools have gotten a lot of ESSER money over the last 3.5 years. And that money is done in 20 days. You have to spend all that money in 20 days if you have not spent it. So at your next board meeting in September, that should be tops of your list of your questions. Have we spent all our ESSER money? As somebody, you said grants, donations. Sometimes people just donate money, and sometimes schools get money for fees. We could also put in there fees like for lunch program, although kids get free lunch now. Sometimes uniform fees or other kinds of field trip fees or whatever. So these are all the different kinds of buckets of money that we get. Just to give you a sense of how much that money is, that basic formula that I mentioned, which is kind of the main guts of the money that schools get, that basic formula was $7,281, or this year, it's that much. It's a 2% increase from last year. And if you remember, the year before, we got big increases of 4% when inflation was 6 and 7. Lease aid, again, a super important bucket of money, $1,314, up to 90% of your lease costs. We get something called long-term facilities maintenance, another $132. Okay, these are just a sampling of the money. That per student, great question, Sheila. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. There's two kinds of revenues that public or nonprofit organizations get, really almost any organization. Some of it's restricted. There's some strings attached to it, and some of it is unrestricted. You can spend it however you want. It's really important to be aware of, let's stay on that a second. It's really important to be aware of what's restricted and what's unrestricted. So things are restricted, they must be spent on a specific purpose. So for example, all special education dollars have to be spent to support students with special needs. And it has to be above and beyond what those students get as general education students. So for example, let's say every student in your school gets a computer or a Chromebook or whatever. You cannot use special education dollars to get Chromebooks for students with special needs. Why? Because every student already gets a Chromebook. This has to be above and beyond dollars. What's in addition, what's something special that they need? If they need a particular program or some other particular technology that not all kids get, you can use these dollars for that. Lease aid, again, obviously it's for the lease. You can't use lease aid money to pay for pencils. English learners and compensatory aid, Compensatory aid is for students who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Now, the purpose is to serve those students. There doesn't happen to be much reporting as there is for these other buckets. Some of the unrestricted money, the general basic formula money that I mentioned earlier, some of the other state funds, if you get donations from just families or people, that money is unrestricted. Some grants that you get are restricted. You have to report it and spend it on particular things, and some are unrestricted. You spend it however you want. All right, next slide. What determines how much money the school receives? Let's throw that in the chat. What is the most important thing that determines how much money a school gets? Go ahead and throw an idea in the chat. Abby says enrollment, student enrollment, enrollment. Yeah. This little, I like this little cartoon. The recurring poor enrollment prognostications place havoc with our school budget. What will this year's enrollment be? So you've all started school. You all have a budget that's based on a certain number of students. And school just started in the last couple of weeks. And I guarantee you, your school leaders are like, how's our enrollment, right? We made some guesses about our enrollment, and are we getting there? Emily, I see a little smile. I hope you are achieving the enrollment that you budgeted for. Let's go to the next slide. So yeah, the first and most important thing is indeed student enrollment. Go ahead. The second most important thing is student enrollment. And the third most important thing is student enrollment. And this gets to your question, Sheila, is this per student? We've got these two things that we talk about here in Minnesota. One is average daily membership, or ADM, and the other is pupil units, which sounds not very human, but it is a little twist on per student. So ADM literally refers to the number of students enrolled. One student enrolled for the entire year. I don't care if they're 5 years old or 20 years old, they generate one ADM. If they're enrolled for half the year, it's half an ADM. So this tells us how many bodies we're going to have. How many books do we need? How many of those Chromebooks do we need? How many teachers, etc. It doesn't tell us how much money we're going to get. What tells us how much money we're going to get is the weighted value of the students enrolled. And this is a pupil unit. So for example, one student in pre-K, in this voluntary pre-K it's called, and this isn't all pre-K, it's certain pre-K programs, they generate 0.6 of a pupil unit. Students in grades K through 6 generate 1 pupil unit. That's nice and easy. And the middle schoolers and high schoolers, 7 through 12, they generate 1.2 because they're 20% more, presumably, complicated to all those hormones and whatever that start in middle school. We get extra funding to manage that. But no, you think about what goes on in high schools. You've got your math teacher and your English teacher and your science teacher typically, right? You've got all these different teachers, you've got more social workers, perhaps, you've got counselors, you've just got a lot more going on in high school, and so we get paid extra. And so this pupil unit number is just it's the number that you use for budgeting and financial monitoring. So when we say at our schools, oh, we've got 100 students, oh, okay, great. What does that actually translate to into dollars? We need to know how many pupil units we have because that'll drive the money. And your financial statements must show both. If they're not showing pupil units, talk to your financial people. Let's look at an example. All right, how much do our words matter? ADM versus pupil. Let's look at this example. We've got a school that's got 10 pre-K students in the VPK program, 140 students grades K through 6, 50 students in grades 7 and 8. And let's assume they've all been enrolled the entire year, which I know is very unrealistic. But let's just assume they've all been enrolled the entire year. What's our ADM? And what's our pupil units? Anyone, if you think you got an idea of either one, throw it in the chat or put it in the chat, but don't press go yet. Let's let people think through this. So let's look at this example. Keep it moving. So these 10 pre-K students, we said earlier, are worth 0.6. So these 10 children, these 10 little ones, 4 and 5-year-olds, are worth actually 6 pupil units. Doesn't matter if they're there the whole day or not. 140 students grade K through 6, as we shared earlier, each of those students are worth 1.0, right? So 140 is 140. And then we've got these 57th and 8th graders. These ones are worth 1.2. So our ADM, we just add up the number of humans. We've got 10 humans in the pre-K, 140 humans in K6. Oops, that should say 50 in 7 and 8, and it does indeed add up to 200. Let's look at our pupil units though. We've got 6 plus 140 plus 60. That's 206. Let's just do a little look at how the difference is. Sorry, that should say 50 again, not 40, but the 200 is correct. That difference of 6 students, let's just think about the basic formula, the lease aid, and this facilities maintenance. And there's other buckets of money. These are just 3 of them. That's a total of $8,000, $8,700. You could add more to this list. There's probably more like $10,000 or $12,000. But just on this list, this difference of 6 kids amounts to almost $60,000, $52,000. It's actually going to be closer to $70,000, but just to show you with these numbers here. So pupil units versus ADM makes a big difference. So you have to, I'm going to drive that home. You have to know what you're talking about. So those words matter. As you all, a couple of you shared, the Minnesota Department of Education is who sends you the check, right? Now they don't send a check. They actually literally make a deposit 2 times a month to your school, to your bank account directly. And they base that primarily on student enrollment. How do they know how many students you have? For all of your schools, because all of your schools have been around for 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, in some cases 25 years. You tell them, literally you tell them, you submit a form, you say, MDE, we're going to have 150 students, whatever, 10 pre-K, 150 of the 140 of the middle schoolers, I'm sorry, elementary school, and 50 middle schoolers. You tell them that, and they start sending you money. If what you told them is if reality is different, then we need to change what we tell them. So here's a question for you. Thanks, Pat. You anticipated. When should you tell MDE that your enrollment has changed? Do you think you should tell them when it's changed by 1 student? In other words, we had 200 students, but now we have 201 students. Should we let MDE know that? Should we let them know when it's 5%? We actually have 5% fewer kids or 5% more kids than we thought, or 15% or 25%. When should you let MDE know? Great question, Sheila. How often can you change that number? Pretty often. I think you can change it pretty often. Probably as often as you like, actually. But let's say once a month or once every couple weeks. Get a couple more answers. The question is, do you want to be more accurate and do you want to be closer to what reality is when you tell MDE, or farther away? All right, 5 more seconds. All right, we got a conservative bunch here. About half of you said, 4 of you said 1 or more. So in other words, whenever it's different. And about 60% of you said 5%. I think that the best answer of this bunch here is definitely 5%. Because if it's 1 student, you'd be letting them know every day. Because you know, some of our schools have kids come in and out. It can be active, and it also depends how big your school is. If your school had 20 kids total and you had a change of 1 student, that's 5%, right? But if you have 300 students and 1 student's different, that's not that a big impact. But if you have, let's say you have 100 students and you have 5 fewer students than anticipated, or 5% fewer, that translates to about $50,000. Just gets to be a lot, because MDE, at the end of the day, things are going to come out in the wash. Sometimes your school gets paid too much money, you spend that money, and then MDE is going to claw that money back. They're going to be like, oh, wait, we paid you too much, because MDE is going to figure it out. Every month, give or take, your school completes what's called a MARS report, and that's where it uploads the actual data to the state. And periodically, a couple times a year, the state looks at that actual enrollment compared to what they're paying you on. And if they're paying you too much, they're going to keep the money. They're going to get it back. So stay within that 5%. Your financial statements should indeed show not only the ADM and the pupil units, like we talked about earlier, they should also show how much is the department paying you on. And if you, as a board member or a school leader, you see that it's actually different by substantial amount, by more than 5%, you need to ask that question, what's going on? All right. We talked about student enrollment and how that determines, those are the top 3 reasons. Well, it's the 4th reason. Specific students generate different kinds of buckets of money. So like we talked about compensatory revenue, this is for students who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. English learners, multilingual learners, students with special needs, Native American students. Different students generate buckets of money. So for example, I'm sorry. And then the level of expenses in certain areas drive certain elements of state funding. We'll fly past that. So here's an example. So for every student in your school who is eligible for free or reduced price lunch, you would generate an additional really $2,500 to $3,300 per student. The higher the concentration of students, of low-income students in your school, the higher that number. So say you had 100 students and 3 of them are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, you'll probably generate $25 a student. But if out of those 100 students, 95 of them are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, you will be generating $3,000 per student. Now, those resources need to go to support those students. For English learners, similarly, per student, you're going to get $1,200 with a minimum of 20 students. So this is kind of unique. If you have 2 English learners in your school, for example, you would still generate the equivalent of having 20 students, or in this case, it'd be about $25,000. Because to serve 2 students, you still need some program, right? It's hard to create a program with $2,000. So it's important to know who your students are. And of course, these funds have to go to support those students. All right, let's talk about what we spend the money on. Jan, you have a question. Why do charter schools get less dollars per pupil than regular public schools? That's a great question. I think that the biggest answer to that is that, let's say, well, all of you live somewhere. For those of you who own a house, you pay property taxes. And in those property taxes, usually for most school districts, there's a chunk of money that goes to the school district. That's the local portion. And we hear about these referendums, right? We as voters were asked often to say, hey, do we support a referendum? Well, we'll pay more taxes on our local taxes to go to school districts. Charter schools don't get any of that local money. Some school districts like Edina or perhaps Woodbury generate a lot of local money. School districts like Minneapolis generate less money per student. Charter schools generate zero money in terms of that local referendum money. So that's the main reason that charter schools get less money than traditional public schools. Things like lease aid are a way to help balance that a little bit. It's also important to understand that charter schools, special education dollars is a really important, complicated thing as it relates to education funding. Because charter schools don't have a particular geography, every student who enrolls in your charter school actually lives in a different district. And the way special education funding works in Minnesota is that the district where the student lives has to pay part of the costs for that student with special needs. And so that's traditional districts don't like charter schools sometimes, oftentimes, because they have to pay the charter school for educating some of the students in the district. So I don't know the exact numbers, Jan and everybody. Charter schools probably get anywhere from 5 to 15% less funding than traditional districts, depending on the school and the district. All right, let's go backwards one, Pat. Just keep it on the question. Let's throw in the chat. Yeah, just right there. Throw in the chat, what are ways that charter schools or schools spend their money? And try not to get too specific. So for example, don't say pencils, but just say maybe materials, for example. What are all the different ways charter schools spend their money? And as you think about salaries, think about whose salaries, like what are the different important buckets of people? So people, things, but what are the important buckets of those things? So Emily, as you think about salaries, how would you bucket out those salaries? Sheila, we got professional development. What else we got? What else are we spending money on? Administrative salaries, yeah. Because it's probably important to know how much of teacher salaries, exactly. Support staff, special education salaries. Emily, you might be picking up what I was laying down. If special education dollars are restricted dollars, in other words, we need to report on them, we should be separating out how we're spending it. And that's why we need to know the special education dollars. Yeah, what else? What kinds of stuff are we getting, or what kind of services? What else do we spend money on at schools? Yeah, administration, staff, office, transportation. Yes, indeed. Expensive. Yeah, custodial. Yeah. Specialty teachers, yep. Office staff, transportation, technology, computers. Couple more. Utilities, that's a good one. Do we have books? Do we still get books a little bit? Sometimes, some books. Let's hear it for books. Yeah, so curriculum, right? Materials, all that kind of fun stuff. All right. I'm gonna put forth some categories here of how I encourage you to think about how schools spend their money. The first is on administration, right? And this would be at the school level, the highest levels, the school board and the school director, kind of the highest level. The next, and the school director would be, salary and benefits. In Minnesota, we use this bucket called district support, and sometimes these two buckets are combined. But this is everyone else in the office, the finance people, the marketing people. These are things like photocopy machines often, all those kinds of things that support the administration and support the work of the school. Then you got your big bucket. This is the big bucket of, should be the biggest area. Your teachers, again, salaries and benefits, your educational assistants, your books, your computers. Now, there's actually computers in the administration section too, right? The computer that the director gets doesn't go in this third bucket, but the computers the students get and teachers get too. Special education, right? We need to have a special bucket for that because that money is restricted and we need to be able to account for it. There's something somebody said PD, professional development, instructional support. What are the things that support instruction? So professional development is a big one. Then we have what we call student support or pupil support. These are all the things that support students outside of the classroom, counseling, health, transportation. And then got to pay rent, and you got to pay your utilities and your cleaning and all that kind of stuff. Got this weird bucket we call fiscal and other costs. This is like things like your liability insurance for your building, or you might actually pay your authorizer fees out of this bucket. Your food service program, your lunch program, and your breakfast program. And then some of you have what you call, what like might be community programs, after school programs, for example. And these buckets might look a little, they might look familiar to you, they might look a little different. But on the next slide, I want to show you an example of what, this is a page from an audit from one of your schools. Actually, I think it is indeed from one of your schools in this room from a few years ago. And you can see under expenditures, well, we'll look under revenues. Like the revenues are pretty big buckets, right? We've got this local revenue, and that's a pretty low number. And that's in part because charters don't get any of that local revenue. But we got a state sources. That's a whole bunch of different things, federal, and then sales of some, they sold some computers or whatever. But under the expenditures, we see these buckets that I just mentioned: administration, right? District support, regular instruction, exceptional instruction. That's another way to say special education. The community education, instructional support, pupil support, sites and buildings, etc. So you can see these buckets are, this is how your auditors, these are the buckets that your auditors share. And I would suggest to you that your monthly financial statements should follow this same organization with more detail. So under administration, you should have salaries, you should have benefits, you should have materials, contracts. Under regular instruction, you should have staff, you should have materials and computers, et cetera, et cetera. So under each of these buckets, you could have 3 or 4 or 5 line items. But organizing it this way creates consistency with your audit. All right, I want to take a pause just to see if there were any questions or anything emerging for folks. Keep the questions coming in the chat. All right, these are all the things we do spend money on. Let's talk about what we can't spend money on. Public purpose test. As a public school, you have to spend money that's focused directly on the function of the school. How many of you get the Star Tribune? Did anybody see an article last week about a school that allegedly had spent money on taking staff to Top Golf to go golfing? Anybody see that? Sheila, you're smirking, but is taking staff to Top Golf directly relate to the functioning of the school? Probably not. It'd be a tough sell. I guess you could have a year-end staff party, but I don't know. It's a pretty tough sell. Does the expense serve the community as a whole, or does it benefit an individual? I'm going to give a couple examples. Let's keep going. So again, public funds means all the funds, regardless of where it came from, that are held or administered by a government entity, the charter school. So it doesn't matter where your money came from. If I gave your school a donation, I'm just a private, my money is private money, right? But the moment it hits your bank account, it becomes public money. That's why many schools have PTAs or PTOs. They are not public entities. Those dollars are not public dollars. They can spend them however they want. So schools can expend public funds for a public purpose. It benefits the community. It is related to the function of the school and does not have its primary objective, the benefit of an individual. Let me give you an example. And just throw in the chat yes or no and press go when I say. A school, the parent of one of the teachers, the father of one of the teachers at the school passed away, and the school director thought it would be a really nice gesture to get that teacher some flowers, and has a bouquet of flowers, a really nice bouquet, $80 sent to the home, and purchased that with the school dollars, sends it to the teacher, and all the teachers sign a card, and it's very nice. Is that an appropriate use of public dollars? Go ahead and throw in the chat yes or no. Lots of no's. All right. You are all correct. That would not be an appropriate use of public dollar. It has nothing to do with the function of the school. Ah, Sheila, you got a great example. Let's unpack that one. Just to go back to the flowers for a second, the teachers can each chip in $5 and sign a card and send flowers to their colleague, but it is not an appropriate use of public school dollars. An ice cream truck at the end of the year party for the whole school. Let's unpack this a little bit. Sheila, do you want to advocate, you want to make an argument for how that is an appropriate use of public funds and it relates to the function of the school?
It's probably no, but I think because we're doing it for the whole school and all the kids benefit from it, it's a yes.
Yeah. Anyone have a perspective on this? Anyone else have some thoughts? Want to agree or disagree with Sheila? Come on, people. No one?
Okay,
Pat,
well,
oh, go ahead.
I was
Please
gonna
jump in.
chime in that, it doesn't have anything to do with student learning or, the basic function of school, but I feel like one could argue that social, what am I gonna say? Positive social environment and experiences are important for a healthy school, so. I don't know.
Yeah, Nicole, you have a great question. Is it for learning? Is there some, I mean, I don't know. You could make an argument either way, probably. Would be I'm not a lawyer, and like I said, I'm not an accountant. You could probably make an argument for yes, like it's a celebration, it's marketing, it's promoting the school, it makes everyone want to come back next year. You probably could make an argument for it, right? That it's for the benefit of the school. So there's not always easy answers. Jan, as a classroom teacher, can we do a classroom fundraiser for a specific reason or to use it for a field trip? Or does it have to be for a specified reason? Fundraisers are interesting. Like you can absolutely raise funds for field trips. The question is, where does that money go? Where does it sit? Does it ultimately land in the school's bank account? Because as I mentioned before, once it lands in the school's bank account, it's absolutely it's public dollars. I mean, I think back to when I was a teacher in St. Paul Public Schools, and we would go to Valley Fair. And I think we did this at my charter school too. I'm trying to remember if we used the school dollars or if the kids had to pay or how that works. I don't even remember what we did. But it's kind of like the ice cream truck. Like, I don't know, is that beneficial? We had a class actually at St. Paul when I worked there in the science department that it was a physics class, and the physics class went to Valley Fair, right? And they put a physics twist on it or whatever. So it's not always an easy answer, but it's important that folks have an understanding of generally this idea. We can't give individuals money because we think it's. I'll share one other example. When I was a school director in Minneapolis, I would get calls happened to be from the police union, and they would request a donation. And I did it one time. And then I learned that that was a no-no. I can't donate school money to another nonprofit organization. What am I, crazy? And they shouldn't be calling me. I mean, they should know better too. But it was actually absolutely on me. Like, I cannot donate public dollars to another nonprofit agency or whatever it was, a union. All right, let's move past that. I want to talk a little bit about setting and monitoring budgets. As we talked about a little bit earlier, budgets like lay out where your values are. They lay out your plan. You can talk about having a school that's focused on community engagement, but that needs to show up in the budget in some way. And so we got this little cartoon. Congratulations on your new school issued laptop. In other news, your teacher has been laid off. Budgets are about making decisions. What do we value? Do we value computers more or teachers more? Ideally, we can have both. So budgets are these roadmaps for schools to meet their mission and their goals and their objectives. They help you think about what are we prioritizing in the short term and long term. You got to be focused on meeting your requirements and your mission, right? Your contractual requirements with your authorizer. We need to, students need to, for example, your authorizer is very unique, right? Osprey Wilds requires you to engage in environmental literacy learning for your students. You have to put some money to that. As board members, you set the expectations, you engage in its development, and by law, you are required to approve a budget. The administration carries out the plan. And together, you monitor what's happening. That's why you get monthly board meeting minutes. Monthly financial statements. So you need to have good quality financial reports so you can monitor what's going on. And then the board, in collaboration with the administration, revises that budget when circumstances warrant. So like we talked about earlier, when your enrollment is different than you projected by 5%, you're going to tell MDE that the number is different, and you might consider revising your budget because the amount of money you're getting is more or less than you anticipated. Doesn't mean you have to revise your budget every single time. But when that change is substantial enough that it's going to be meaningful enough, you need to think about, what do we need to do? Do we need to cut? Do we need to add? Some things, we have a session we'll do in the spring that's a little more in depth. But as you think about this, you all just approved a budget in June or May, and you might be in a position to revise your budget here in October or November because you'll have more reality about your enrollment. But really be realistic. It's so easy to add numbers or to add enrollment or to add fundraising to your budget. You have to be realistic. Is this based on reality? And Pat, jump in. Osprey Wilds, if you see numbers that feel unrealistic, you're going to call the school leader and say, what's going on here?
For sure, yeah, we're keeping an eye on that pretty closely. And unfortunately, that was an issue for a school we authorize that is no longer last year.
Yeah, I mean, you might say, oh, we're going to raise $100,000 in grants this year, but you've never raised more than $20,000 in the past. You can't just add numbers. So be realistic, be conservative. Invest in people in program that gets results for kids. That's something that it's just really important to understand. Are we getting value for our dollars? We don't have unlimited dollars. We need to put our money where we get good results for our kids. And of course, as we've talked about a couple times, advance the school's mission. If we say we're community engagement, how do we put some money into that? If we say parental involvement is core to our school, how does that translate to dollars? And as we talked about, ensuring those restricted revenues are used appropriately. We talked a little bit about ESSER funds. Again, just a reminder, this is all the COVID money. I'm sorry if it wasn't clear on that before. This is all the money that we've gotten for the last 3 or 4 years from the whatever the different things that the Congress passed over the last 4 years to support schools. A lot of
I
money.
can say, David, we were trying to do a pretty good job last spring of checking up on if schools had extra money in there. So I think most of the schools we authorize have spent that down, if not entirely already, nearly entirely.
Yeah, that's great. And there's actually there's a way to see online what all the schools have spent based on public data. And I've done a little bit of looking too, and I think I agree with Pat. Like, your schools have been investing those dollars. Now the question is, those dollars are stopping. The programs that you created out of those dollars, or the things you did with those dollars, if they've been successful, doesn't mean you have to stop spending money on those things, right? Again, invest in the things that are working, and don't invest in things that don't work. But double check this. All right, we're back to our 5 questions. Let's walk through these again. So we talked about enrollment. How does your actual enrollment compare to your budgeted enrollment? You're going to have a board meeting here in the next 2 weeks, probably, or 2.5 weeks. School started, we budgeted for 200 students and 206 ADM. What's our actual? And make sure you're getting it in pupil units as well as ADM. And how much is MDE paying us on? Are they paying us on the right enrollment level? Those numbers should all be, pretty close. Budget to actual to MDE. And if
I
it's
would say
not,
too, this is something that Osprey Wilds, and sometimes David, you are contracting to do this when we do board observations. Definitely something that we're looking for to have a conversation about in the board meetings.
yeah. Easy question to ask. You don't have to be a finance expert to ask that question. And think about, if the answer is, if those numbers are divergent, okay, what are we going to do about it? Do we need to change our budget? Do we need to increase our enrollment, our outreach and marketing? All right. Are actual revenues and expenditures consistent with the budgeted amounts? Let me give you an example. At your next board meeting, September 23rd, let's say, you see that you had budgeted $100,000 for computers this year. Let's say you're a big school, you've got 500 kids, you've got to get 100 new computers, or $100,000. That might be a lot, but you see that you've already spent 80% of that money. You're like 1 month into the school year, not even, and you've spent 80% of your money on computers. So what would you do with that? On your financial statements, typically you'll see a percentage of how much you've spent. 80%. Is that, you say, hey, this doesn't feel consistent. We're only a month into the school year, or 2 months, and we've already spent 80% of our dollars. Ask the director, hey, what's up with that? The director very likely would say, well, yeah, we bought all the computers at the beginning of the year. We're not going to wait till the end of the school year to buy our computers. On the flip side, if it's April and you've spent, let's say, $20,000 out of that $100,000, you might think, oh, we're saving money. No, we made a decision that we needed to invest in computers for our kids. And so we should be doing that. And if we're not doing that, we should know why. All right. Do we have enough cash? You guys should be getting monthly cash flow statements that project out 12 months. What's happening next month? What do we anticipate will happen in each of the next months? Because if we run out of cash and can't pay our teachers, we're in big trouble. So you should always have an eye towards cash. Now, if we run low on cash, what do? It's not out of the question for charter schools to have relationships with banks. And of course you have a bank, but you can get lines of credit. Not uncommon for charter schools to get lines of credit. Biggest and most important question, are we getting our desired student outcomes? Are we meeting the contractual goals that we have with our author? Are we meeting our mission? And as a board, it's really important to think about, what are we actually measuring? Is it just about state test scores? Is that the only thing? Are we going to wait once a year to see how our kids are doing in reading? Or do we get some data a couple times a year about reading? Do we hear about the environmental education learning and programs that are happening? Get clear on what you want to know as a board and how it relates to your outcomes with your authorizer and your mission and all that stuff. And then finally, are we spending all our money on ice cream or on educating kids? No, I'm being a little flip there, but are we spending funds appropriately? Any questions on those questions? And Pat, maybe afterwards you can share with everybody or throw it in the chat, that piece that's on the website that kind of speaks about these 5 questions.
Sure.
And really, literally, I encourage you to come with a piece of paper ready to ask these questions at your board meetings, if you don't already do so. And who are you asking those questions to? Well, you might be asking them to your school director. You might be asking them to your board treasurer, and you might be asking them to your business manager and your financial service provider. Many of your schools, most of your schools, are contracting with Designs for Learning or DHE or Clifton Larson Allen or a big company. Some of you have small companies or you have staff. So that's one question you need to know. Are these contracted, like these companies I mentioned, or is it someone on staff? If it's a contract, they report to you, right? You, as a board, you create contracts with organizations. Someone from the board should be signing that contract, probably. And so you have a right to ask for what you need from them. They work for you, you don't work for them. Now, if it's someone on staff, they report to the executive director or however you're organized, but they do work closely with your finance committee and your full board. Now, generally, these folks should be coming to your board meetings periodically, if not often. And some of the questions they'll be able to answer if you're not sure. Now, these are the folks that do your day-to-day bookkeeping. They do your accounting. Oftentimes, they're the ones reporting to MDE. They're filling out some of these forms and these different kinds of things. And so it's really critical that they're preparing timely and accurate financial statements. A balance sheet, income and actuals, and a cash flow statement. And we're not going to get too deep into what all these things mean, but they help you understand, where are we at with cash? Are we spending what we thought we were going to spend? Are we bringing in what we thought we were going to bring in? They also stay up to date on statutes and MDE stuff and things as they relate to finance. When there's changes in financial stuff, they should be up to date on those things. So they need to do a lot of learning and understanding, and they should help your school leadership understand what's going on out there, what they need to be aware of. They do not make financial decisions for the school. If you want to buy something that's expensive, they can help you think about it, but it's not their decision. Educators should be making decisions about how you spend your money, not the business people. So they support you all to make those decisions. And they should help you think about it. What are the implications? Hey, if we spend the money here, what does that mean here? All that kind of stuff. All right. We got some time for some questions. What are some thoughts or reactions or questions, or what resonates or what doesn't make sense, or what do you wish we would talk about here in the next 9 minutes? Yeah, Emily, what do you got?
I just had a question about, I think it's pretty obvious the consequences if the school board adopts a very aggressive budget, like you're saying, we're going to raise $100,000, and I've never done that in the past. But can you speak to a little bit to the disadvantages of having like a very conservative budget, or is that like that's never a bad thing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We have to invest our money in our kids, right? So this gets to the idea of fund balance. We didn't really talk about fund balance, but some schools really want to make sure they have a lot of money in their fund balance, or their rainy day fund is another way to think about it. And so then maybe we're not investing enough in our programs and our people today to get good outcomes for our kids. So a school might be very conservative and not want to give any raises to teachers, for example, because they're just very conservative. But then you might lose teachers, right? Maybe. So yeah, it's that trade-off. It's really finding that balance. We're not going to invest any money in field trips this year. And so that might impact student learning on environmental education, for example. So I think or we might just not have enough staff, and our staff get overworked and overtaxed and burnt out. So I think those are some of the things that you have to kind of balance out in terms of spending enough or not, or spending too much. Or does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Other thoughts or questions or comments or challenges that you're navigating at your school, the beginning of the school year here, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in? All right, well, let's go ahead to the next slide. So what's next? Practice. And the main thing you can practice doing is asking those 5 questions, making sure at your board meetings, you're asking those 5 questions and at your finance committee meetings. Can we answer all those questions? I mean, somebody has to, and the full board should be aware of what those answers are. We're going to do another session here in 2 months on November 12th, focused on your financial audit. Right now, most of your schools are neck deep, probably, in the financial audit. And this is a summary of what happened last year. And this is where an independent certified public accountant looks at your financial statements and looks at some of your policies and practices to make sure that you're protecting those public dollars. And so we'll talk more about how to read those audits in 2 months. Jan, you have a question about what needs to be done in order for those local dollars to go with the student to charter schools. So kind of following up on your question, I think, from why charter schools get a little less than traditional schools. That would be a law change. You'd have to advocate with your your state legislators to change the law so that those local levy dollars actually follow the student, because right now they go to the district. We'll have this session in November. We will have another session about budgeting in the spring, and there might be one more woven in there as well. In the meantime, I think the next slide, you'll see my contact info, or we have a poll here real quick. And while the poll is up, if you would also go to the next slide. Let me see, I can put the poll up. See if I can. Let's see if I can figure out. Here it is. Here's the poll. And think about, yeah, right in the chat box, what's one thing that you're walking away with? And if you go to one more slide, you'll have my contact information, and feel free to reach out with questions anytime. And with that, we'll let you have your 2